Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on the third day of works at the International Congress of the Mexican Electoral Studies Associations, SOME. I am Miriam Hinojosa-Dieck. I am political science and former electoral counselor at the state of Nuevo León, and I am pleased to have the opportunity to facilitate this panel of real experts in one of the most passionate subjects, direct democracy. In an era of representational crisis spreading worldwide and political parties which seems not to be able enough to embrace or manage most of the demands coming from the citizen, many people are turning their regards to direct democracy tools, looking at it as the way to bring back the power to the people. However, this idea is not new. There are countries with a long tradition for using this kind of citizen participatory mechanisms, and their experiences can bring essential lessons for countries like Mexico, which begins to walk on this path. This is the aim of this panel and, of course, of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy, which will take place in Bern, Switzerland next year. So I recognize our three experts to take the time to present us their ideas on these issues, as well as to give us further information about the Global Forum, where other great specialists on direct democracy are going to gather. But before I lend them the micro, let me give you their introduction. First, I want to introduce Bruno Kaufman, who is going to talk about modern direct democracy, Swiss experiences, global changes, and Mexican opportunities. Bruno Kaufman is the global democracy correspondent at the Swiss Broadcasting Company. As a political scientist, he has published extensively on participatory and direct democracy, including the Global Passport to Modern Direct Democracy and the European Democracy Passport. Bruno is the co-founder of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy and chairs the Initiative and Referendum Institute Europe. He has been member of executive government at municipal level and chairman of local election commissions. He lives with his family in Arboga, Sweden, the birthplace of democracy in Sweden, where the first parliament gathered back in 1435. Bruno represents his city in the River Council of the Arboga River and loves to travel by night train across continents. Welcome, Bruno. Then we are going to listen to Joe Matthews, who will present direct democracy in the US from local to federal, key lessons for Mexico. Joe Matthews is co-president of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. He's a long-time California journalist, writing a weekly syndicated column about California that appears in more than 30 newspapers and on a public radio. He's an editor at Zocalo Public Square, a media and civic NGO, which is part of Arizona State University. He is the author of two books, one about California governance and the other about Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Welcome, Joe Matthews. And last but not least, we are going to listen to Caroline Verneillet, who will present the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy as an invitation and opportunity for building a worldwide democracy community. Caroline Verneillet is responsible for Democracy International's public relations and global community building. She studied international relations at the University of Leuven and broadcast journalism at the Erasmus University College in Brussels. Before joining Democracy International in 2017, she worked for the Belgian Development Agency in Morocco and the UNOPS in Switzerland. At Democracy International, she managed a global hub for democracy activists, which seeks to offer networking and capacity building opportunities for organizations and people working on democracy issues worldwide. An important element of this work is the yearly Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy, the world's largest gathering focusing on direct democracy and citizen participation. She advocates for more transparent and participatory politics and supports activists worldwide. Welcome you to Caroline Verneyen. And we are very happy to welcome you all to the SOME Congress. So please, Bruno, start. We are listening to you.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for having us on this panel. Thank you to SOME for this organization of this great conference and also this panel. For us, it's of course a privilege now to be able to share with you some of the backgrounds of the conversation on global direct democracy, which we have developed in the last 10 to 15 years. As a consequence of the trend that democracy needs to be stronger, needs to be more deep. And we would like to share with you a few thoughts about our backgrounds, our work, and also, of course, as you have said, the invitation to the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy, which is not just an event, but really a process. So I will begin basically with you can say, a health check on democracy. And I share my screen. Of course, we are all now so impressed about the crisis of the world through the pandemic, but it's also a check, you can say, on our democracy, a check how strong our democracies are. And there has been a lot of already of research done how this pandemic has also influenced the state of democracy. And a colleague research institute of us, the Varieties of Democracy at Gothenburg University, has just produced this very impressive map showing where the pandemic, where Corona has been used to violate basic rights and fundamental rights and democracy. And as you can see, in many parts of the world, democracy has not done very well during this time. But at the same time, of course, it's also an opportunity to see how people are reacting to it, how people are using their rights to express their wills in the elections and referendums. And this is another new diagram showing that in some countries, in fact, during the pandemic, there have been elections and referendums. And in fact, there has been an increase in turnout, while in other places around the world, because of the pandemic, people have less been ready to participate. And in some cases, of course, it's also a big issue of practicalities. If, for instance, there is a remote voting process, postal voting process available or not. I think this all will learn and teach us a lot how to make democracy more robust, more stable in the future. The background of all of that is, of course, our conviction that democracy is the way to govern a country, to live together, a democracy which is based on the fundamental Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which also indicates that we as citizens in a country have the right to be involved in the government directly or indirectly. Over the long-term scene, of course, democracy hasn't done so bad in the last, let's say, 50 years. Democracy has increased in more and more countries. And today we have a situation where never before so many countries have been basically democratic. But at the same time, of course, also this openness allows for criticism about how democracy works now, because the background, the origins of all our countries are not democratic, they are non-democratic. Looking out to the whole of the world, we can see certain tendencies when it comes to democracy, that a representative government has really developed into more of a representative democracy, becoming more local, more in the cities and the regions, more participatory through the forms of direct democracy, but also, and this is also very clearly in this time of the pandemic, more digital, that we need to use modern technology to make democracy working. We see that all over the world, that countries, like in this example, Taiwan has used the tools of digitalization for really strengthening the conversations around government. This is a platform provided by the Taiwanese government to bring in people on all laws ahead of decision making. In Finland, there is a very great platform on participatory and direct democracy, which can be used both locally, regionally, nationally, but also European-wise, provided by the government. And in a city like Paris in France, the mayor has done a lot of initiatives to bringing the people digital-wise also on the local level. So all in all, we can see that the principles, the procedures, the practices, the infrastructure and the communication of modern representative democracy is at stake. When it comes to the principles, we can clearly define those as threefold. One, the rule of the law, the protection of human rights. Secondly, the principle of delegation of power for practical reasons through elections. And thirdly, the very important feature of citizen participation. This brings in the procedures as practices, which means that there needs to be certain requirements when it comes to appointments, for instance, for courts, for judges, which we discuss in many countries nowadays, who is in charge to do that and how is it done. How the elections are working. We have just seen a very challenging election in Kyrgyzstan, where the election commission just 2 days after election invalidated the election because it has been misused by the governing parties. And thirdly, the tools of initiatives and referendum available for people to bring in new issues, to set the agenda, but also to be able to vote on issues as they can vote in elections. When it comes to the practices, it's very important that the rule of the law is ensured by the autonomy of the judicial system, that the elected people are accountable to those who have elected them, and that participation is done in an efficient way. For all this, we need infrastructures for democracy. We need a public infrastructure which is well served. We need a society which is well prepared for this kind of democratic reality. And of course, we need institutions which are available to educate, to preserve, and to build this kind of democratic practices. Finally, this needs a communication structure, and in a way, this seminar, this session here, and the Global Forum as such is in the first hand a communication effort, which should educate ourselves about in which ways can we strengthen democracy, in which way can we make participation efficient, and what doesn't work very well. We can compare, we can learn from each another, but we have also to do a lot of efforts to inform each another, to tell about different experiences, to tell stories, to do our journalistic work in a proper way. And finally, and this is of course the heart of all of it, we need to engage in conversations. We need to see democracy as a conversation. We need to see that this is something we can learn from each another, which we have to be involved in dialogue. So in that way, you can say a modern representative democracy is basically about a conversation instead of a confrontation, and that's a conversation that never ends. Now, looking into the features of direct democracy, of modern direct democracy, we can see that basically by law, most countries do have some form of direct democracy. Is it through an initiative process? Is it through a national referendum on constitutional issues? Is it sometimes also just through a plebiscite, which is done by a government or a president? So that doesn't mean that if you have some form of direct democracy in your constitution, that means that you have a proper and good and democratically sustainable practice. But we can also see that most countries have in fact had some forms of national referendums in the last 30 years. Only the ones in red never had that in this time, and most countries do have some experience. So there's a lot of practical practice we can learn from. Overall, we can say that 9 out of 10 countries do have had some referendum experience, and 7 out of 10 countries do have some referendum provisions, which means that you also know in the law when you can have a referendum. 3 out of 10 countries have some forms of citizen-initiated forms of referendums, and just less than 1 out of 10 countries do have a well-working citizen-initiated referendum practice. So that means we really have a lot of work ahead of us. Now a little bit about my second home country. I'm talking to you from Sweden, where I'm a citizen, where I live since many years, but I'm also a Swiss citizen, and I'm a practitioner in Swiss direct democracy for more than 30 years. I've participated in more than 1,000 elections and referendums. So Switzerland, as you may know, is a very small country in the middle of Europe. It's a country which has some resemblance to much bigger federal countries like the US or Mexico, which means that there is not one nation. There are different states. In Switzerland, 26 states, which have different languages, different cultural backgrounds, different religions which are dominant. So it's a country which is a composition of different constitutional traditions. And also, as you can see here, it's a country where different languages are dominating. The red part is the German-speaking part, the French is the blue one, the green, the Italian one, and then we have a small fourth language, which is national language, the Rhaeto-Roman. But most importantly also, in Switzerland, there are more than 2,000 municipalities, and each of the municipalities has its own system of direct democracy and its own system of making regulations. So you have this kind of participation on all political levels. Now, for instance, just a few days ago, we had one of these national voting days where we had 5 issues at the ballot. We had an initiative from a right-wing party to limit immigration. That's the one you see the numbers, where about 61% said no to this proposal. We have every second, third year such an initiative, and mostly people have voted against it. We had a vote on the fighter jet, on a new fighter jet for the Swiss Army. This was a referendum, which means it was a proposal by the government, which the people then gathered signatures to bring it to the vote. And we had other votes on the hunting of wolves, on the introduction of paternity leave, and a tax break for childcare. Now, this system of direct democracy is really a very inherent part of the Swiss political system. I would say it makes representative democracy in Switzerland more representative because it makes politicians conscious that they not have the last word in all the cases. It's a very stable system. It's experienced and developed over 150 years. And as you can see on this timetable, you see all the voting days until 2039. So it means that every year, about 4 times a year, people are voting on different issues. And for this, they get a booklet from the government, the red one, which explains all these issues. And I think this is quite an interesting practice, which Switzerland obviously can share. So all in all, there have been 635 national votes since 1848. But in fact, in the last 30 years, more than 1/3 of all these votes took place on the national level. So it has become a much more active feature. And all this together, we want to share, of course, at the Global Forum 2021, which will be in Switzerland. In fact, the first time since the foundation of the forum in 2008. After that, we had several forums in different parts of the world, but next spring we will go back and Caroline will tell you more about this forum. But again, it's important to say that the forum is not an event, it's a process. It's an invitation to discuss these issues, to share experiences, and to bring in your ideas, because our idea is really to make democracy more democratic, and we look forward to discuss with you, to see you, and to really together make a positive impact. Thank you very much for your attention, and I give back to Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno, for this presentation, quite a lecture you share with us. There is so many challenges for democracy today, as you say, which go from practicalities to the struggles to the very foundational principles of democracy and how can we make it more democratic, as you said. You have presented the paradigmatic case of Switzerland, always very interesting. And now we are going to hear about another federal example, which is the United States. We are ready to listen to you, Joe Matthews.
Great to be with you. Thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you to the Congreso. Thank you to Carlos Gonzalez, our friend, for this invitation. I come to you from Santa Monica, California this morning, sort of remote offices of Zocalo Public Square, which is the name of the media and civic organization where I work. We publish and we put on events, and our name Zocalo is directly taken from the Zocalo in Mexico City, even our logo. We're now part of Arizona State University, which is why you see a picture of Arizona State University. Was the only public university in America created by direct democracy. It's also why you see a picture of the Phoenix light rail behind me, which also was been funded and built in part with by votes of the people. I am gonna talk sort of first go sort of broadly and talk about direct democracy in the United States. And when you talk about that, you're often saying things that Americans themselves don't know. They don't understand a lot of the direct democracy in their own country, and they really don't understand it in others. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't do democracy very well, even though we do it a lot, sometimes without realizing it. Let's break it down to the three different levels: local, state, and federal. Local is where direct democracy is richest in experience and practice in the United States. We've had form of direct. We often say that the direct democracy in the U.S. was a product of the progressive period at the very beginning of the 20th century. But really, there are instances of referendums and public votes that go back even before the founding of the country. Massachusetts and New Hampshire entered the Union originally in way back in the end of the 18th century by referendum. Since the 1850s, actually, every state that's come into the Union has had to vote in a referendum to join. And then really at that local level, we have, and at the city, county, school district level of government, it is routine to have to vote on borrowing, bonds, taxation, or many other big decisions. In fact, it's local direct democracy is actually is practiced in every state except for one, Delaware, which is now a relevant state since Joe Biden is from Delaware, though he hasn't talked much about this this subject. But Delaware is so small that I think you can probably get everyone together and they just have a meeting. So there's that. But that's where we're richest in direct democracy. At the state level, about half of the states have a direct democracy, an initiative and referendum. An initiative meaning a citizen-initiated, at least in theory, citizen-initiated law or constitutional amendment where it's drafted by somebody presumably not in the government. It circulates by petitions and qualifies for the ballot. Or a referendum, where, as Bruno mentioned, it's where you're judging something, some action or some law that's come out of your legislature or your parliament. There we have 24 states that have the process. There's a strong geographic tilt towards the West and to the states that, like California, where the Americans tend to the notion that they were part of some revolution, but of course here in the West, our states were conquered. As you know well, in Mexico, we were conquered into the United States. And so our states formed later. And in some sort of, I would argue, some lingering opposition to federal power. And so I think there's a connection between that opposition to federal power and the greater interest, use and practice of direct democracy in the American West. Certainly the states that are strongest in this are California, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon. But it is still practiced. There's an important direct democracy practice in Massachusetts, for example. There is a recent tendency in the last generation to weaken this practice in many places, perhaps most notably in Florida, where there's also been a lot of fighting over voting, as you may have read about, that continues into this election, where there's a question about after voters use direct democracy to give felons, people who had committed crimes, the right to vote back. Republicans there have tried to take that right back away. So that's highly contested, but about half the states. Then at the national level, we are, of course, democratically an outlier, really a laggard. We're one of the few countries that call itself a democracy to have never had a national referendum of any kind. We've never let our people vote at that level. Now, that's partly because we don't do national elections very well. Our elections are conducted at the state and local level. We don't have anything like INE, a real national democratic structure, though we should, and I will return to that. Now, I want to shift here and talk about California, the place I write about and know best, because I think it's useful. Now, in California is usually very good at, because we're people from all over the world, we're sort of a lot of the world's discontents, the best looking group of discontents in the world, that's California, right? We come from all over, and we're very good at integrating things from all over. The most popular food in this era in Los Angeles is the Korean barbecue taco, which combines tastes from Asia and Latin America, the Middle East and Africa, right? If you look at an iPhone, if you have an iPhone, on the back it says designed in California, but the technologies are not from California. It's a bunch of things put together. So we're really good at integrating and designing things together, except in this area of democracy and direct democracy in California. California is really, in many ways, a model of what not to do. But because it's such a strong model of what not to do, and there's so much practice and bad practice, you actually can learn a lot about what you should do by looking at what we do. So, I think this gets to some principles. One principle is that you want a citizen-directed process. You want this to be a participatory process where ideas for laws and projects and constitutional amendments that go on the ballot come up from the people. And you would think that would be something that would happen at the local level. Alas, it's actually very rare to have a grassroots or popular measure. The most frequent sources of things at the local level are from politicians themselves. People actually people who are in elected office or have elected power, not using the office or the legislative body, but they themselves raise money separately and put something on the ballot to advance their interests, to be able to raise money. The other thing you see is a lot of contests over land development and land use. That's become very common, so much so that there are guidebooks written for people who want to build or develop things in California with titles like ballot box planning. There are 2 hotels in Beverly Hills, in the city of Beverly Hills, that have been running ballot initiatives against each other for years to prevent their others' expansion. It's fairly common when someone wants to start a new shopping center or mall, for the mall or shopping center in the nearest one to put a measure on the ballot to block that mall in whatever municipality it wants to be in. My favorite was in Ventura County, just the county north and west of Los Angeles. There was a local sort of hardware store chain called the Do It Centers that successfully fought off Home Depot, the huge national and international chain, by passing ballot initiatives in different parts of the county, in the cities of the county, that basically said a hardware store or a store could only have a certain space or size that was designed to be just slightly smaller than anything Home Depot would allow. That's what we see a lot of in the local level in practice. And we're not seeing a lot of, we're not seeing a lot of up from the people sorts of things, in part because the process does not have the things Bruno talked about, public infrastructure and support for citizens who have ideas and that help them get them on the ballot. So that's one thing. You want a citizen-directed process. You also want something that gets on the ballot that it's related, that evaluates the quality of an idea. Unfortunately, you get on the ballot in California at the local and state level by money. You have to pay signature gatherers. There are high thresholds of, often 1 million signatures. At a local level, it can be tens of thousands, but it may be very high percentage, 15, 20 or more percent of voters to get on the ballot. It's actually more expensive at the local level on a per signature basis to get on the ballot than at the state level. People pay petition gatherers because there's very little time, usually only a few months. Typically, we see now it's about $5 per signature costs when you're trying to qualify a state measure. At the local level, we're starting to see $12 and $15 per signature, in part because people move around and you need to get someone to sign who is a registered voter in that particular locality. So standing on a street that most of the people you may encounter may not actually live in that locality when you're outside a shopping center or a post office or wherever you're trying to operate. The other, money is also very powerful in the process in being able to run a campaign. In a big state, sprawling state, 40 million people, 12 different regions, 6 or 7 large media markets, just to get attention costs $20 or $30 million. So it's very limited. There's also a nasty element of this that the ballot measure process can be very corrupting to politicians. And you think, why would that be? Well, because many politicians, in their frustrations to get things done within the legislative system, use the process to advance policies. A legislator who was the head of the legislature's budget committee couldn't get things in the budget he wanted, so he took budget priorities, important ones like on mental health, to the people. The problem is that to do that, he had to form a ballot measure committee and raise money from people and powerful interests and powerful people who wanted things from him legislatively. So ballot measures open up this sort of path of corruption. And most politicians now have a ballot measure campaign committee that they raise money for, and they often prefer it because there are no limits on a gift to a ballot measure. You can raise $10 million, $20 million, there are no limits. There are limits on your candidate committee. So it has actually become a sort of a big slush fund. When Governor Jerry Brown left office in 2018, he still had a ballot measure committee he controlled with more than $15 million in it. So he is still a force in politics. He is using the money that donors gave him to support different ballot measures on the ballot that he say advance or protect things that matter to him. So that's a different reality. Again, we should have a process that is not determined by money, but has a public infrastructure where ideas are somehow evaluated and based on the power of their idea get to go up. We haven't figured that out. And then finally, things should be integrated. When you're voting in direct democracy, you're acting as a legislator. A legislator does. You're advancing a constitutional amendment. You're making a decision on taxation or borrowing or some sort of legislation. And that should be integrated with the other process. We don't do that. We actually have kept the processes separate in a way that hurts both direct democracy and the legislative process. We have 2 budgets in California. One is the one the legislature passes, and then the other one is when the people throw in different spending or taxation decisions they make. As a result, and the people's tends to desires, they want to spend more on things and tax less. There's a ratchet quality to our budget system. It's constantly ratcheting up spending and constantly ratcheting down revenues. And many times because the direct democracy has been used to put formulas into our constitution, into our budget laws that automatically move revenues in these different directions. We're also incredibly inflexible. Ballot measures here, of course, when you change the constitution, you can't change, you make a ballot measure that passes, it changes the constitution, you can't change it again except for another vote of the people. But California is unusual, unique among the US states, in that when we pass a law by constitutional amendment, it can't be changed except for another vote of the people. So you get some ridiculous things. In 1922, the people established regulation of chiropractors, back doctors, not necessarily the most respected part of the medical field. We have had 13 different measures since 1922 on chiropractors because it was established by a vote of the people, by a ballot initiative. Every time anything needs to be changed with chiropractors, it has to go back to the people. But more profoundly, what this does is lock in decisions from the past, create the notion of being governed by ghosts. So the house that I live in, its taxation, the formula that governs taxation was set. I have no control over it as democratically because the formula was set by a ballot initiative that passed when I was 4 years old. And I have 3 children, young children in schools. And the funding, which I'd like to be more, but the funding formula that really limits the funding for the schools was approved in the fall of 1988 when I was a freshman in high school. So there is this sense that you don't have control, that this inflexibility locks things in. So it's very important that a direct democracy system be flexible and integrated with the other legislation, the rules, and the budget. A very last thought to conclude. We don't have a national referendum, I mentioned. Our friend John Matsusaka, who leads the Initiative and Referendum Institute of the US at the University of Southern California, has a really wonderful proposal to do that, to 6 steps where we would start with advisory or non-binding referendum on some things, maybe on going back into the Paris Climate Agreement, for example, or maybe even having a referendum on before we go to war. Maybe that would slow us down and or often march into military interventions in other parts of the world. But I actually think there's another great reason for a national referendum and having that debate. I think it would allow us to address some of the anger and populism that's so much part of our politics. It explains who our president currently is. But it's also an opportunity it would be an opportunity, a national referendum, and maybe ultimately a national initiative process for this country to catch up to the rest of the world democratically, and also really an opportunity for us to rethink direct democracy with the full benefit of looking at all this world, all we can learn from the world, to create a system that is more citizen-centered, less grounded in money, more flexible and integrated. That a national referendum, I think, may have momentum as a place where the United States can sort of finally live up to its own self-conception of itself as a model democracy and actually try to become one. That opening, that void, that fact we've never done that, and that, as so many other countries have, really creates this moment of great opportunity where we could finally design something new. And after I know a pretty negative talk, I will end on that optimistic note.
Thank you very much, Joe Matthews, for this passionate presentation. You point so many important issues, the knowledge of people have or not about direct democracy and how it connects or not different levels of a federation. I think Mexico is passing through a time for which all these things you share make a lot of sense. And now, to give us a little sample to taste what can we expect for this process, which is the Global Forum on Direct Democracy, we are going to listen to Caroline Verneyen. Caroline, we listen to you.
Thank you, Miriam. I'm calling in from Cologne in Germany, which is also one of these countries that has never had a national referendum. But as a very federal country, we do have a lot of direct democracy tools on the regional and local level, especially compared to the country where I'm actually from, which is also a very federal country, Belgium, that has no direct democracy whatsoever, no tools at all. Yes, as I work for Democracy International, and we are an international NGO that really works on empowering citizens and giving citizens a bigger say in political decision making. So direct democracy, citizen participation, it's really our core business. And so one of the things that we do and that we really like organizing is this yearly, yearly Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy that Joe and Bruno founded. And I would also like to thank Joe and Bruno for giving us a little taste of what the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy is really about and the topics that it covers. I will now talk a little bit more about the Global Forum itself. And as Bruno already mentioned, we like to think of it as a process more than an event. And I will hopefully share my screen now. Yes. Right. So Bruno mentioned this already a little bit, but so what we've seen in the last century is that the number of democracies around the world has known a steady increase, with over half of the world's population now living in a democracy. However, in recent years, we've also seen that democratic institutions are being hollowed out. There was a huge wave of democratization after the fall of the Soviet Union. And the end of the Cold War, but this is now definitely behind us, and we're starting to see a rise actually of illiberal democracies. But there are two trends that remain. Democracy is increasingly participatory and it's increasingly local. So currently 108 countries have instruments that their citizens can use to take direct influence in political decision making. And so in total, there are actually 1,818 direct democracy instruments that are currently existing on the local, national, regional, and even transnational level. And so the idea was that with the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy, with the first Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy was founded to look at these direct democracy rights and these trends more closely. So the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy is now the largest conference in the world. It's dedicated to direct democracy and citizen participation. And we are very proud of the fact that it's really attended by people from civil society, as well as people from academia and people from government who want to learn how to put these things in practice. So it's organized by an international consortium under the leadership of Democracy International, the Swiss Democracy Foundation, and Arizona State University, and was founded and is chaired by Bruno and Joe, who are also in this call. And as a conference, it travels around and takes place somewhere else each year. And this is very important because we like to really look at democratic practice on the ground and bring in local experience and local knowledge. So we've been in 8 different countries on 5 continents and in cyberspace this year, as so many others. So the first forum was in Switzerland, the most established direct democracy in the world, and it was for a global forum then a bit small. It had 100 participants. These days we have from 300 to 500 participants usually at a global forum. The focus of that first forum was really on emerging tools, how to develop direct democracy tools, and for example, also a tool that was then new or that didn't even exist yet, but that was going to come into existence. For example, the European Citizens Initiative. 2008, wait, let me just, here's a map of places where the Global Forum has been. So in 2008, we experienced a global financial crash. And so the Seoul Global Forum that took place in 2009 really looked at how can direct democracy make policy more sustainable? How can it make economics more stronger? Then we moved to San Francisco in the US, where we had a record number of participants of 500 from across the globe. We looked at the California practice of direct democracy that Joe has now given us a little insight into. 2012, we met in Montevideo in Uruguay, where we looked at how direct democracy can help involve all people, especially minorities. How can it involve the underprivileged? In 2015, in the wake of the Arab Spring, we had our first forum in Africa, in Tunisia. Tunisia was, as many people probably know, awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its contribution to the building of a pluralistic democracy in 2015, so the year that we were there with the Global Forum. And so this was, of course, something that was very important to us, to be part of this process and to get our experiences from this process and to look at the challenge that Tunisia was facing on decentralizing its politics. 2016, we were in Donostia, San Sebastian in the Basque Country. In 2018, we were in Rome, in Italy, where we looked at local democracy. And this was also where we founded, or where a Magna Carta of democracy cities was presented. I will talk a little bit more about that later. And then finally, last year we were in Taichung, Taiwan. Taiwan is relatively new when it comes to direct, digital, and participatory democracy. It was actually a military dictatorship until the mid-90s. But actually in 2018, they had a very first national referendum where they had 10 initiatives, citizens initiative on the ballot that were voted on. And so the year after, we had the forum in Taichung to look at the experience that they just had and to see what the future would bring for direct democracy in Taiwan. 2020, this year, we normally would have been in Berna already in Switzerland, but our plans changed, as did those of many other people. So instead, just last week, we had our very first online forum on modern direct democracy, where we had over 500 people from across the globe, and it can actually still be rewatched on the democracy community, which I will also talk more about later. Yes, and so we are here now to invite you all to the 2021 Global Forum now in Bern, Switzerland, where we will really look at direct democracy in practice. It will be around a cantonal voting day also, so that will be part of the program. We will discuss about the practice of direct democracy in Switzerland, which is the most advanced direct democracy in the world. And hopefully in 2022, we will come to Mexico City and be able to meet you all in person. Right, so can I? Oh. Right. So the Global Forum is not just an event, it's an ongoing process. And the goal is to bring together different stakeholders and to take stock of the state of direct democracy around the world. So we want to learn from each other, exchange, promote best practices. And we've developed several instruments to help achieve these goals. So one of these, I'll present some of them. One of them is an academic project. One of them is more aimed at administrations, and one of them is aimed at activists. So the first one is the Direct Democracy Navigator. I mentioned before that there are currently 1,818 direct democracy instruments in 108 countries. We know this because of the work of the Direct Democracy Navigator. It is the world's only database that gathers all existing legal documents, instruments for direct democracy. It was developed by Democracy International, the Initiative and Referendum Institute Europe, and the Swiss Democracy Foundation, and it's hosted by the University of Wuppertal. And it does two important things. So firstly, it has developed and uses a typology of direct democracy instruments. Bruno spoke before on the different things that make, on what is the difference between a referendum and a plebiscite. What are these little details, as Joe also mentioned, that make that direct democracy tool is a good direct democracy tool. And so the Navigator has defined these different categories that we can use to really classify laws that exist around the world and to see, to compare them better to each other. And so secondly, the Navigator features all available procedures in the world. So all direct democracy laws that exist on all levels, local, regional, national, and transnational. So for each country, you can research which direct democracy instruments are available there. You can read the original legal texts. Like, for example, here we have the legal text for the national citizens-initiated referendum in Switzerland. You can see all of the different details. Are there quora? Is there a turnout quorum? Is there an approval quorum? And you can compare them to legal designs available in other countries. So this is really an important tool to know what exists around the world, an academic tool. Now, the second instrument that came out of the Global Forum process, so I mentioned that in 2018 in Rome, we launched a Magna Carta on direct democracy, or on democracy cities. So democracy is becoming more local, and that makes a lot of sense, because the local level is the level where we make our lives. It's where we feel the impact of policies on our daily lives. And so we started this International League of Democracy Cities. You can see here on this map, I believe we're currently around 20 or 30 cities. It was, the Magna Carta was drafted at the Global Forum in Rome in cooperation with all of the participants who were there. So 300 people helped draft 20 dimensions of participation at the local level that make that a city is a democracy city. So you can see those here, yeah. So these are really things as, is there infrastructure? Can young people participate in democracies? Is there digital democracy? So this is it's 20 dimensions that cities can really use. It's sort of a scorecard that they can use to see how they are doing locally on their democracy. But it's also meant as inspiration to inspire administrations, to call upon them to really make concrete commitments to direct democracy. So the League was officially founded the next year at the Global Forum in Taichung by representatives from 10 cities, and since then cities are still joining, and every year we follow up on this League of Democracy Cities and how these cities are doing on the Magna Carta at a Democracy City Summit. This Democracy City Summit, the next one, will be just after the Global Forum on the 1st of May in Bern. And then finally this year, we launched an international democracy community. So something that we've heard a lot at the Global Forum from people who work on direct democracy issues is that they don't really have a permanent space to network. There's not a lot of information available to them. And so another thing that we've noticed, like one advantage that we have going with this Global Forum to different places around the world every year, is that we see how many great initiatives are actually out there. We meet all of these inspiring people who have great organizations. And we wanted to do something to accommodate them, to promote their work, to help them learn from each other. And so this is why this year we launched this international democracy community, where quite simply anybody who works on direct democracy, citizen participation, an organization or a single person can really make a profile and put themselves on the map. Like these little flags that you see there are all people who are working on these issues around the world. And they can so they can create a profile. They can promote events on there, and we also offer. We have a great network of journalists. We also offer stories on there. We organize webinars, and of course we invite these people to come to the Global Forum. And so this is really our digital extension of the Global Forum, where we want to enable this sharing and this experience and knowledge sharing throughout the year between Global Forums as well. And so then finally, I would just like to invite anybody who's watching this to register for the Global Forum in Bern. That is at, you can see the link here. So that's 2021globalforum.com. And to sign up for the International Democracy Community, that's democracy.community. Then the final, my final message for this is actually, I would like to share a video with you, an invitation video by the mayor of Bern, asking you to join us next year in Switzerland. And so I hope that this will work.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, warm greetings from Bern, Switzerland, the next host city of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy in spring 2021.
Are you seeing?
Yes, you heard me right. The upcoming Global Forum will not take place in autumn 2020, but in spring 2021. The corona pandemic has deeply affected public life all over the world. In order to ensure that the Global Forum can remain a truly global event, we are postponing it to April 28th to 1st of May in 2021. The pandemic challenges our democracies in many different ways, and it shows also the leading role that cities play in such difficult times. The Global Forum will focus on the impact of pandemic on modern democracies and other questions around the main theme of direct democracy. These are uncertain times, but one thing is certain: you don't want to miss the Global Forum in 2021. You will have the possibility to see at first hand how direct democracy works in Bern, capital of Switzerland. Switzerland is considered an international role model for direct democratic instruments. I'd be very happy to welcome you personally next year here in Bern to the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. Don't miss it and register now. Thank you.
So, I would also
Well, the musical end was great also, but I especially want to thank you for your great presentation, deep, full of very important data, and I'm sure listening to you, Caroline, we are already looking forward to participate on this process of Global Forum on Direct Democracy. And we have already some questions from the public. So if you agree, I think it is better if I read it for you, and then we make a last round in order you to answer and bring us some conclusions for this great panel, okay? Some of them are presented in Spanish, so I'm going to try a translation. So the number one is the legislative citizen initiative is a mechanism of direct democracy also, and why? Second one, jurisdictional theory sustain that the power is not for share. So to governate, the public power is shared with citizenship. And third one, to activate a mechanism of direct democracy demands resources, human and economic, as well as technical resources. Facing this, minorities are then limited in the use of direct democracy mechanisms. The three are presented by a very well-known specialist on these issues in Mexico, Rosa Inés Alacio, so thank you very much. Some other specialists, our friend Carlos Gonzalez is asking us, he tells us, thank you very much for sharing with us your knowledge and experiences, which are very useful to strengthen our work in our countries. And can you share with us any innovative experience of actions to promote citizenship participation in the context of COVID-19 that makes contact and meeting of people difficult? This possibility of adapting successfully experience is very important, particularly in Mexico. And if you allow me, I have another question coming from me. Maybe you have heard here in Mexico, we are just figuring out our very first example of a nationwide consultancy because of the Supreme Court find it was constitutionally the mechanism launched by the executive. What can you tell us about the reports between powers when it comes to direct democracy? So if you agree, we can go in the very same order we use for the presentation. So Bruno Kaufman, we are listening to you.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and thank you very much also to Rosa Garcia and to Carlos Gonzalez for these questions. I think they are questions which are really approaching some of the problems we have when we discuss about direct democracy today, because of course, everywhere in the world, these notions about democracy and about direct democracy, they are understood in different ways. Sometimes direct democracy is seen as an opposite to representative democracy, while in practice, of course, this is not true. There are no direct democracies in the world. There are only representative democracies which direct democratic features, which means that there's no country where there is not an elected parliament or delegation of powers for most issues. But what we have, and what the Navigator, which Caroline presented, shows very clearly, there is a rich availability of different tools of direct democracy available. And what is key is, in a way, not what is right or wrong, because histories and cultures are very different from country to country. So the exact labeling of a direct democratic tool is different. But the basic idea of it is, of course, that the people, the citizens, are in charge, not only on election day to delegate their power, but to be in charge every day when it comes to be involved in the dialogue about finding solutions. Because this is the soul of democracy, is the conversation, is exchanging different opinions before making a decision. Sometimes this is much of a consultative feature towards those who are put to govern. Executive powers have executive powers. That means these powers cannot be put to a vote every day, because for practical reasons, you need to be able to make decisions, especially, for instance, in situations of crisis, as we have seen now during the pandemic. But that doesn't mean that all the powers are put there. The same for the legislator, for the parliaments. They are put to and mandated to do different things, to legislate, for instance. But again, this shouldn't be an absolute power. This should be subject to public transparency, to public control. And direct democracy can introduce a feature of this kind of check and balances, which today many people feel it's lacking in their democracies. They are feeling they can choose between basically like Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, and if they don't like cola, they don't know what to do anymore. But they cannot be involved in producing which kind of drinks they really want to have. So in a democracy, you need this kind of production responsibility for everybody. Otherwise, you just become a consumer. And direct democracy is a connection between those who are put to exercise powers and those who are mandating those to make powers. And direct democracy can be, of course, a very great tool for minorities who are normally maybe not big enough to have a delegation in a parliament or a big party. So they have the right to put issues forward. They can set the agenda. But for that reason, you need, of course, low thresholds. You cannot have too high thresholds, which again only gives these powers to the powerful. And finally, in my remarks, I would like to say that what's very important to understand is that there is direct democracy, which is governed from the top, which is very many times also used in dictatorships to, in a way, bypass legislators or institutions, and where presidents just can put an issue to the people when they wish, and they can make what they want with it, and they can control the process. So this is a very dangerous way of direct democracy, while a legislative, controlled and constituted way with independent institutions to overview it, it's a form where direct democracy really gives the citizens more powers and makes democracy more democratic. So we have to differentiate there. And we have also now to learn in the pandemic how we can make this more robust, more sustainable, and, for instance, through digitization, more safe even in times of health crisis. And we see all over the world that people now learn how to use digital tools. And we hope also that the election commissions will adapt to that, that it will be easier to vote remotely, because going to a ballot station and standing in a queue is, of course, in a pandemic, not a very safe way of participating in a democracy. Thank you very much for having me and us in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. I think you make it so clear, wonderful. Thank you so much. And Joe Matthews, do you want to conclude something?
Just two things. I agree with, especially what Bruno said about the danger of this plebiscitary approach, which you know, our friend Andres Manuel is pursuing. But I would say to people who might be, I would want to give advice, actually. I dare say I would give advice to people in Mexico thinking about how to approach a plebiscite like that. And I think there might be a tendency to use this very questionable consulta, this questionable use of direct democracy to attack direct democracy. I would suggest it's an opportunity. It's an enormous democratic opportunity if played well. You know, if you look at the experience of sort of plebiscites in Uruguay in 1980, or in Chile in the late 1980s, or even here in the US, where we see very powerful governors or something put something on the ballot that's really plebiscitary, there's great opportunity to use the plebiscite against the government, to take that and say, you know, this is bad, but we have a better idea for a better, more democratic, more participatory future counter. So vote for this, against this, as a way of expressing your need for more democracy. And you saw that a plebiscite sought by the military dictatorship in Uruguay pivot against that. You know, the story in Chile told in, you know, what is still the best movie I've ever seen about direct democracy, the 2012 Chilean film, No, starring a great Mexican actor, Gael Garcia Bernal. And, you know, there is this sort of jujitsu to it, where you can actually advance democratic principles, and by taking the plebiscite that comes at you and sort of spinning it around toward a more democratic way. I would suggest that. To the question of COVID, Caroline can really talk about that, because Democracy International is part of convening a real look at COVID democracy around the world. And there's not a lot of wonderful stories to it, but there's been a lot of retrenchment. But one thing I have seen and experienced firsthand is at the school district level. I have 3 kids in schools, and I am constantly being surveyed. I was being surveyed in part of a participatory thing just yesterday to talk about being asked my opinion about all sorts of things in the instruction of my kids, the presentation, the schedule. I have, you know, and when, of course, we go back to school, since we're still not back to school here in California and Los Angeles County, in a way I've never been asked my opinion before or been sought to participate. It's very hard to make decisions, in part because the national COVID response is so dysfunctional and there's so much disinformation. But certainly that is a light of participation, and I dare say democracy. We sort of get to vote on things in the schools that we've never experienced before.
Thank you very much, Joe. I think you put it so clearly. And yes, we are facing trouble, but also opportunities, of course. Caroline, go with your conclusions, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Bruno and Joe also. I think I just really want to reinforce this message that political power in a democracy, it comes from the people. So citizens' initiatives are the very essence of what democracy means. Because it allows citizens to set the agenda very specifically and to make decisions on the policies that govern their everyday lives. And representative and direct democracy in that sense are really not in a competition. They really complement each other, because you give a politician or a government a mandate for a certain period of time, 4 or 5 years usually, But with direct democracy, you can really complement that mandate, and you can take it back when you think it's needed. You as a citizen can really say, there's, I mean, I agree with what most of the government does, or you don't, and then you vote again in 4 years. But on this issue, I think this is missing, or there's something that that is missing from the conversation, and that's important to enough people. And so you can really set that on the agenda and set it on the ballot, and make decisions on that. Or you can really express your disagreement with laws that that representative government is making, as they can do in Switzerland, for example, where if you gather enough signatures, you can say, you can call on a referendum for a law that has been enacted by Parliament. So you can sort of recall a law. And I think this bottom up direct democracy is really important, and I think this is a big difference between the plebiscites that you have and citizens initiatives is that that a citizen initiative allows you to complement the mandate that you've given representative democracy. So for the COVID-19 question, we have done a lot of interviews and webinars with experts and activists around the world to see how COVID-19 has impacted their work and democracy in their countries. And unfortunately, there are not a lot of good examples. We have seen a lot of negative effects. We see that it's really hard to collect signatures in a lot of places. Collecting signatures needs to be done in person. Seeing as most countries had lockdowns, have banned events, this is of course not possible anymore. We see that votes were postponed or cancelled. Some countries did that without announcing a new date. So this really makes it very hard for citizens to plan with what is coming. And so I've been thinking, what would be a good example? I think the best example the best examples are countries that allow these processes to sort of continue, so that provided extensions of deadlines, that communicated very clearly if a vote was cancelled, when it would take place. For example, Switzerland cancelled its May vote, but they postponed it to September 27th. They voted last week. On a record number of ballots, I believe, on a record number of ballot initiatives. The European Citizens Initiative, which is the only transnational tool of direct or citizen participation that exists currently, they've extended deadlines for signature collection with 9 months. So this makes it usually these most laws specify that for a citizen initiative, you have to collect so many signatures within a certain period of time, right? And because this is now more difficult, there are places that made provisions for that made it the signature collection period longer. And so that, I think, is really good practice, that makes it more easy. And I think the main thing that this has shown is that we need more tools. I think this is an enormous opportunity to create more digital tools, to call for more digital tools, or to call for mail-in voting. Sorry, to call for more differentiated ways of participation for citizens.
Thank you very much, Caroline Berna. We have been talking about essence of democracy, as you say, and this is what this is all about. So we had such a great morning conversation. Thank you all. Thank you, our 3 experts, our audience, of course, and of course also the institutions which organized this Congress of the Mexican Electoral Studies Associations, the SOME. Good morning for everyone, and we are still working here in our Congress. See you soon. Thank you very much from the deep of our heart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very, very much, Miriam.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Carlo.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Carlo.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Carlo.
Bye.
Thank you.